Okay, so with a kind of a story of miracles, people, what they tend to do is they tend to kind of think about Jesus turning water into wine, and they go, miracles, yeah, but they don't happen, do they? Well, just because you haven't seen one doesn't necessarily mean that they don't happen. And what we shouldn't do is discount the story of Jesus turning water into wine because it's a miracle. Because just because you haven't seen one does not mean they don't happen. Now, we've spent the last few weeks looking at John chapter 1. And in there's loads of different people that think that Jesus is God. So when we get to chapter 2, it's not really a huge surprise that we begin to see him doing some very special things. Now, we've got two stories. So Jesus turning the water into wine and Jesus clearing the temple. Okay, and I think John's making 2 points here, and they're linked. So the first one is this: enjoy a relationship with God. Enjoy a relationship with God. Now, Jesus doesn't just turn any water into any wine. Okay, he doesn't turn any water into any wine. That would be a very cool party trick, wouldn't it? Just, we've run out of wine. Jesus goes, well, yeah, okay, we'll turn on a tap. Okay, and then you can have it. You can have the finest wine. What he does is he changes Jewish ceremonial washing water into the best and the finest wines. Now, the Jews, they had to make sure that they had done certain things before they could really be in a good relationship with God. And that's how we define religion. It's doing something so that you can be in a good relationship with God. But Jesus replaces that water with wine. Now, one thing that I would encourage you not to do is wash with wine. What do you do with wine? You enjoy it, don't you? But you will do when you're old enough. See, there's a big difference between what we define as religion and what I would define as an enjoyable relationship. Now, Luke is going to get married this year. Okay, Luke is going to get married this year. Now, I just want you to imagine, there's a picture of Luke and Libby. Okay, I want you to imagine that when he got down on one knee and he asked Libby if she would marry him, she pulled out a contract. Okay, and she said, I will only marry you if you do these things. Okay, number 1, you must buy me a present every week. Okay, 2, you must clean our car every weekend, even when it's raining. 3, you must wash yourself before we hug or hold hands. 4, you must always drive me wherever I need to go. And 5, you have to cook a meal for me every day. That's the contract. If you sign it, then it might be a yes. Now, that's religion, isn't it? In this scenario, what is most important to Libby? It's the contract. It's what Luke does before she will marry him. You have to do something to get something that's better. You have to do something to be in a good relationship with God. So what would that look like today? Well, some people might say that you have to pray 5 times a day. Or that at some point in your life, you have to go to Mecca. Or that you have to follow an 8-fold path. Or that you have to learn the Quran off by heart. Religion, religion, religion. But by Jesus turning the ceremonial water into the finest and the best wine, he's saying the relationship is most important. He's ripping up the contract and he's saying, stop doing stuff that you think will please God and start enjoying the relationship with him. Because of Jesus, we can focus on enjoying our relationship. Now, to my knowledge, when Luke got down on one knee, Libby didn't pull out a contract for him to sign. That's true, isn't it, Luke? That is very good. Okay, good. That's because she thinks it's more important to value the relationship than what Luke does or doesn't do. Now, Jesus, when he was on the cross, he did the same thing. He shouted, "It is finished," not "it is beginning." So what is the outcome? Well, the outcome was that the disciples saw Jesus do this and they believed in him. They saw that by enjoying a relationship with Jesus, they were actually enjoying a relationship with God. And that leads us neatly onto the next one, with Jesus clearing out the temple. This is Jesus clearing out the temple, and the point that he's making here is Jesus is the new temple. Jesus is the new temple. I've got that wrong. It says enjoy a relationship with God. But that's not the point. The point is Jesus is the new temple. And there's a picture of an angry, white-bearded Jesus there. Because he looks angry. Okay? Just to put this into perspective a little bit, because we can giggle at the video. To put this into perspective, just imagine on a Sunday morning, during the morning services, we had a market going on in the auditorium. Okay? Just to put that into perspective, it would get in the way of what people wanted to do, and it would distract from what they were there for. So Jesus, knowing that a temple was a place where people met with God, what he wants to do is he wants to clear out that marketplace. So, what's the purpose of a temple? The purpose of a temple is to meet with God. In your groups, have you ever been to one? Have you ever seen one? Have you ever been in one? What does it look like? What's it like? Okay, so in your groups, you've got 1 minute. Have you ever been to a temple? What does it look like? What are they for? All right, go. Okay, so a temple is where you would go to meet with God. But Jesus says something very odd, doesn't he? Did you notice that in the video? He says, "Destroy this temple and I will build it in 3 days." Destroy this temple and I will rebuild it in 3 days. Now this confuses the Pharisees, but John helpfully writes down for us that Jesus was actually talking about when he died and when he came back to life. He was talking about his body, and his disciples remembered it and they believed in him. Now just imagine if the only place that you could meet with God was in a church building. How would that change what you believed? Well, if you wanted to talk to God, where would you have to go? You would have to come to the church building. If you needed God to help you with something, where would you have to go? Well, you'd have to go to the church building. Now, some people do think that a church building is a very special place, and that might be the case. But I don't think it's the place where you meet with God. Now, Jesus says here that that isn't actually where you meet with God. God isn't found in a Jewish temple. Neither is he found in a particular church building. He's found in Jesus Christ, the new temple. That's where we go to meet with God. So Jesus is saying this. This is helpful because John writes this down for us. Jesus replaces the Jewish ceremonial water with fine wine, and he replaces the big Jewish temple with himself. What does this mean for us? Well, I think it gives us two things to think about. The first thing is this. You don't have to do anything to get to God. You don't have to do anything to get to God. You don't have to pray 5 times a day. You don't have to dress in a certain way or say certain things or do certain things. You do not need to do something so that you could be in a relationship with God. But here's the second point. Jesus is where you go to meet with God. Jesus is where you go to meet with God. Now the Bible says that the main problem with this world is not terrorism. Okay, the main problem with this world is not politics. The Bible says that something is broken inside of all of humanity because we've walked away from God. Because we've broken our relationship with the God who created us. Now we live in a world where fear and death are all over the news, almost now on a weekly basis. But Jesus, by his death, by his murder on the cross, he took the punishment for us walking away. He essentially took hell, which is being out of a relationship with God, for us, instead of us. And what he did was he gave us his perfect life to be in a relationship with him. Now, if Jesus had stayed dead, we couldn't have believed what he said. Destroy this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. But he didn't. He did exactly what he said. He rose again on the third day and he came back to life. And now God has raised Jesus up to be king over everyone and everything. So the best place to meet with Jesus, the best place to meet with God, is Jesus Christ. So what I need to do, final time, discuss these 3 questions, okay? So it says this: Jesus died for us as we are. He took our punishment so we can be friends with God again. How does Jesus feel about you? Okay, how does Jesus feel about you? That might be one you just want to think about. Why is Jesus the only place to meet with God? And what is enjoyable about being in a relationship with God? Okay, what is enjoyable about being in a relationship with God? Now, we are going to answer that. If you ask your leaders that question, we're going to answer that from a Christian perspective. Okay? Because when I use the word God, now some other people might have different ideas. We're going to answer that from a Christian perspective. Okay? If you want to ask us about what it's like for other people, we can give you an indication of an answer. But personally, we don't know it ourselves. Okay? So have a think about those. Spend some time in your groups. We're going to spend 3 or 4 minutes in our groups, and then Lisa and Luke are going to come up and give us an indication of what we're going to do next. Okay?